Did you write the questions that you sent us on like a PowerPoint, or you can just read them?
Oh, I could show him. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. I have to think a second where I put him because it's been that kind of a week.
Awesome sauce. So the first question, it is cumbersome to enter the data with the individual drop downs. MS4's have robust programs will give up and enter only a minimum information. So at a minimum, the information in those drop downs are going to provide what is all that information that is requested for that field, and that will show whether or not the program has or has not met its requirements. The MCM sections, there's fields to upload documentation. There's some free type fields for you guys to provide supporting documentations, clarification of activities, and for you guys to provide more details if you need to. But the red asterisk on a field is going to tell you what is required. The form won't allow you to submit a form unless there is something in each of those boxes that have a red asterisk on it. We built the form with the tools that drop down menus, show and no show questions. If there is something that's not working in formatting, we have some flexibility where we might be able to change some of that. So if there's a particular question where we've got a drop down menu and it has yes or no, and you think there's a different option that we need to add, please let Robbie or Brown know, me, Anne, and we can look at seeing if that for the next round, we can maybe add a couple options. There's a lot of consideration when we're making changes to these questions because it's not just me changing a form. It also involves IT people and the permit as well. So, but we are open to improvements in the form. It is a big form, and we went in knowing that there is probably going to have to be some tweaks made after we've launched it once. Next, there are multiple spots for MCM1 and 2 to enter uploads, and please clarify if these are needed and if the upload should be labeled MCM1 and 2 on the name instead of uploading it twice. So again, required elements are marked with that red asterisk, and you will not be allowed to submit the form if those fields have any information that's missing. It won't check to make sure it's good information. So if it's a free type field, it's just looking to see if something's there. All the programs, we're going to encourage you to provide whatever supporting documentation for the activities that you describe in those drop-down boxes. Upload flyers, upload narratives, pictures, whatever you have, feel free to upload them. If you've got a document that includes activities that apply to both MCM1 or 2, that's perfectly fine to upload them to one of those MCMs and just either label the file name MCM1 and 2, or in that free type field, just say pictures from event covers MCM1 or 2. So you've got flexibility on how you represent that. The report took a tremendous amount of time to complete, and it seems like paperwork is more important than doing the job. So unfortunately, documentation is part of the job, and that is essential. That documentation is essentially the evidence that shows your program is meeting your permit requirements. So if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Now, based on my experience, I've launched a couple forms for the overflows, for wastewater plants. We've done ready mixed concrete NOIs, particularly with the reports. The initial round is very time consuming. You've got people converting from a paper format to an electronic format. So there's a good bit of a learning curve there. Once you've gotten this under your belt and you've done it, you don't have to worry about making your account, doing all that stuff the next time. It starts to cut down on the time. Additionally, as the documentation gets more robust, you guys may have not been collecting the data in the format that we're asking for. So as over the year, when you start collecting this data, by the time you get to the annual report period next year, this should go a lot quicker if you're collecting the data with the mindset of here's how I'm going to have to represent it in the annual report. Let's see. The form makes us do a self audit of our program.
Ariel, this is Ann. We got a question.
Okay.
Regarding one of the previous questions. Sarah Jensen's asking, when you say it's not documented, it didn't happen, what specific documentation is expected for each event? So I can start out.
MCM 1 and 2?
Is it specific? Yeah, right. Is it specific to, I don't, let's see. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it says yes.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Documentation didn't happen. Sign-in sheets, so we can get an idea of how many people and that folks were there. Photo documentation of the event. A panorama would be good, just to show the scope of the event. What documents, if it was for education, for instance, if there were handouts, have all those handouts part of the documentation of what was handed out, a picture of the display now I'm talking about participation at a and both 1 and 2 can kind of blend, but education is educating somebody and participation is actually having folks involved. So those are the type of things that we're looking for in documentation. Ariel, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, the type of event that you guys are holding will sort of lend itself to a different type of documentation. So doing a festival versus speaking in a class. When you're out in public, taking pictures, that's fine. If you're inside a school, taking pictures of kids, a lot of times schools won't let you do that. So we're aware that there's going to be different types of documentation for different types of events, but basically we're not taking your word for it. It's not just to trust us, we've got everything under control. You've got to have some kind of documentation.
Right. Ariel, I think we answered Sarah's question. She said thank you in the chat. So.
Okay. Let's see, where are we at? This form makes us do a self audit of our program. If we have one tiny item not in compliance, it shows as not in compliance. And some of the mayors may think that the MS4 coordinators are not doing their job, even if they have a robust program, and this is not helpful to keep our jobs. So this is a correct statement. The NPDES program, now remember, MS4 falls under the broader National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program. It is heavily self-monitoring. Your wastewater plants, when they take their effluent samples, they fill out a report every month, and they signed that report saying that they certify that these tests are accurate and correct. That's part of the big part of the NPDES program as a whole. So annual reporting is a requirement for each permit, has been since the beginning, and this report essentially provides the results of the program's self-monitoring. More specifically, self-monitoring for each of these MCM and requirements. So the permittees need to be used in this report as a guide to help identify areas where program adjustments, corrections need to be made, and you need to ensure compliance. Some of these, if you're saying that you're not in compliance with a particular element, some of these aren't going to be caused by any particular action of the MS4 program manager. Rather, I can see there are some cities having issues with staffing. So when the mayor sees the MS4 annual report, they should be involved in this process ahead of time. So really be a surprise. If you're having staffing issues that are causing you to be in non-compliance with one of the components, those conversations should be happening all along. I know it's a little bit jarring and glaring when you're not used to doing the self-certification. One thing I would emphasize is answer the question that is being asked for the reporting period that is being asked. So don't get too caught up in your head like with the MCM5, post-construction and permanent stormwater, most of that whole section is fully implemented in 2 years. So if you're not meeting the current permit language, that doesn't mean you're not in compliance. If you're in compliance with the previous permit, then you can say that you're in compliance on the annual report. So remember to take each of these analysis in context of what is actually required at the time of the annual report. Education is based only on the number of audience. There's nowhere to put data that wasn't centered around how many people. So a household hazardous waste event, you collect pounds of waste, not people. So I feel that we will stop keeping up with records that can't be reported on that matter. Okay, so remember that the annual report is a snapshot. It's one instance in time where you're looking at it. You need to not stop keeping any information that is relevant. You need to be able to still show effectiveness. You still need to be able to evaluate effectiveness. Just because the annual report asks for the number of people, the permit requires you to determine if your activities are effective in meeting MEP. And so those pounds of waste collected, pounds of trash removed, number of sewer lines improved, all of that is going to go into that analysis when you're doing your MS4 program evaluation. So, for example, advertising and hosting a household hazardous waste event where you provide educational materials as well, and where you collect a lot of household hazardous waste. The number of people who attend is a good way to show and sort of normalize across the state all of the different activities of how much of an audience you're reaching, but that doesn't mean you don't keep track of everything else.
Ariel, we have a chat.
Okay.
Sheila saying, oh, excuse me, I'm getting more than one here. Lori Sal is saying it seems to me that pounds of waste from more is under participation than education. And right, the event itself is participation, people coming to the household hazardous waste. That is under participation. This question, the person that asked it mentioned education. The way you could educate is at this event, you do have a display and handouts, and someone keeps track of how many people came by the display and what was handed out. So there's just multiple ways to capture meeting requirements for education and participation separately and collectively. I hope that answers that question. Ariel, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Remember, an activity is not isolated to one MCM. So you could have one event that touches all the needed requirements of both public education and public involvement. So don't think you have to do each. If you've got 3 and 3 to do, it's not necessarily 3 separate events for education and 3 separate events for public involvement. Those have a good bit of overlap.
Right. And Sheila made a comment that it still won't count if you don't have the number of participants. Asks the question, it still won't count if you don't have the number of participants as one of the required events. Right. If you can't document how many people showed up to the event, then, I mean, having an event's great, but if nobody shows, so, I mean, you all, it could be an estimate, but it has to be reasonable of an estimate, if you will. So that's why taking a picture of the whole event could give an idea of how many people were actually there, and you could kind of guesstimate. But to really confirm how many people were there is have a sign-up sheet. And you wouldn't have that at an event, have someone sign in before they come to a household hazardous waste event. But if you have a display there and people are coming up, you can think of ways to have them maybe or just tally how many people came to your have somebody on your staff document that, or whoever's volunteering. So anyhow,
yeah,
that answers the questions.
Yeah, for the count of number of people, it's going to be an estimate in many cases. Especially if you're doing like a festival booth at a festival. Um, yeah, we're not going to get down into granular information like a Census Bureau analysis, but this is also going to go, it also feeds back into when you do your evaluation of your program effectiveness. If you keep doing an event, it costs you X number of man hours and you only have 3 people ever show up. Is that being effective with your time, your money, your education skill program? Are you ready to move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Collecting data since it's trash removed, debris swept, sewer lines replaced. There's nowhere to add that information. There's not a specific identifiable field. So there is a spot to upload a document at the end of both MCM1 and MCM2. So if you've got a printout of where you're keeping all this data and you want to just upload it to MCM1 or 2, that's perfectly acceptable. That's encouraged. Okay, we would like clarification on what type of monitoring the MS4 can do in-house for non-analytical and what type of certifications are needed to be able to do that. Let's see. Anne, do you want to you have a lot more experience with the monitoring.
Right, for monitoring. So if I understand the question correctly, what kind of monitoring can the MS4 do in-house? Well, they can do all the monitoring, both analytical and non-analytical, if they are, if they're meeting the standard operating procedures associated with that type of monitoring. But most MS4s won't have staff that have that qualification. So a lot of MS4s, especially for the analytical, for the biological, will more than likely have to contract that out. For pathogen sampling for E. coli, that's something that could be easily more staff could be trained and be able to collect those samples. Generally, the sampling methods and analysis should meet the federal rule 40 CFR Part 136. A lot of MS4s some MS4s may have a municipal wastewater plant that might be able to provide assistance with the E. coli sampling. And then again, for the biological, the benthics, at least one of the biologists on the sampling team must meet the certain requirements, train staff with some coursework in biology, specific training and experience may assist in collection. Some training, excuse me, sorry, I'm stumbling on my words. Trained staff with some coursework in biology and or specific training and experience may assist in collections. The minimum education requirements are a bachelor's in biological science, coursework in stream ecology and macroinvertebrate taxonomy, is advanced degree in stream ecology, aquatic biology, or similar field is preferred. And the professional credentials must be submitted to the division and maintained on file. So I hope that answers the question. That's, option one is a little bit more, is prescribed and does require specific sampling events. But don't forget option two is still available. You all can still submit and request or say that you're going to be doing option two and submit that plan before September 30th of next year.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, I'll just sort of harp on, ask your wastewater plants if you've got one in your jurisdiction. most of them do their own E. coli sampling. So they'll have the machine, they'll have the knowledge of how to take the test, how to run the test. So streamline where you can.
Right. Ariel, before we move on, someone had asked what date should be used for information listed on the city's webpage year round?
So if it's on there the entire year of the annual report, just put the first date of the annual report, the reporting period. So July 1st of whatever year. And then just in the notes, just put year-round posting or year-round status, just so we understand.
Right, and more than likely they'll have some information for how many people have viewed the website and stuff like that that would support that annual posting.
Yeah, usually your IT people can pull up data analytics for each of the page and count the number of views. You might want to meet with them before you're filling out the annual report next year, so that if they've got to do any IT magic to that web page to get it to collect what you need, they can get that set up.
Okay, I think we're good in the chat. Oh, they said got it. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good in the chat right now.
So next question, what if a file is too large to upload into my TDEC forms for the annual report? So my TDEC forms can handle individual files up to 500 megabytes. So if you've got 5 files that are 500 megabytes a piece, that's fine. Once you get above 500 megabytes, it starts to get kind of sketchy. So if you've got a single file that's greater than 500 megabytes, see if you can zip it and shrink it. If that doesn't work and you still got this giant file, shoot me, Robbie Brown, Ann an email, and we'll figure out a way to get that file into our system. Sometimes if you are talking about like a GIS where you'll have a folder with a bunch, 5 or 6 different files embedded into it, and they're all fairly large, you might be able to unzip that folder and just upload these files individually, and then we can work on bringing everything together in our GIS system after we get it into the into our universe. So let's say a creek enters a jurisdiction for only a couple miles and then returns to another MS4. Are both MS4s responsible for monitoring? So in short, the answer would be yes. If they select option 1 and the stream meets the monitoring requirements. So, Anne, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, under option 1, you are again, it's prescribed. That is the plan. So however, you could coordinate with the neighboring MS4, and if you want to entertain an option 2 plan, and where you all share monitoring or have contracts or agreements, that could be worked out in an option 2 plan. But option 1 is pretty straightforward. And because the stream flows out of one MS4 into another, you know, some of that monitoring that you do, instead of monitoring at the same monitoring sites that TDEC does, you might want to monitor what's coming in and what's coming into the stream at your boundary, if you will. And if you've got a BMP in place between that point and where it leaves your jurisdiction's boundary, and you have a BMP in place, you could possibly show that you've resolved issues, especially like, for instance, for E. coli. So I hope that helps. Ariel, we've got another question in chat. John Carson's asking if TDEC could set up a Dropbox.
Not necessarily a Dropbox. I think we've got a cloud server, but we would have to get our IT people involved. So It's not as we can't use outside programs. We have to get special permission from our IT people to use that kind of stuff. So it might be possible. It would just take some hoops to jump through on our end.
And I will say the information that comes into the annual report has to be with the annual report. So that's why
Yeah.
it more than likely will have to come through the My TDEC portal. So
Yeah.
another thing.
When you submit your annual report or any report on My TDEC forms, when we deem it complete, the system is going to bundle up your information that you submitted. It's going to build its own PDF. And it's also going to capture all of the attachments to that file and bundle it all together and move it to what's called FileNet, which is a file storage site. So that one, it's publicly available and it's also secure from being edited. And then that FileNet is considered the copy of record.
Ariel, do you want to speak to the status of that right now? So folks, once we start completing annual reports and so forth, where they would find that information?
Like I said, it's going to be publicly available. Those of you that deal with CGPs are going to be a little bit more familiar with the system. Right now, we have what's called the data viewer that is publicly facing, that is basically a look at our database. It has all of the permit information, all documents related to that permit. And then in that area, there's going to be another button that says additional documents for My TDEC forms are on FileNet, and it'll give you a link to another site where you can search by permit number, and it will bring up all of the submittals for the annual report related to a particular permit number. As of today, right now, that link is not live. We haven't deemed any annual reports complete, so nothing's available yet, but it should be up here hopefully in the next week or two. Once that goes live, I can shoot an email to Charlene and she can let everybody know. But yeah.
Thank you.
And yeah, we know it's frustrating that there's two different systems, but our IT group is doing a modernization and they're migrating data storage into this FileNet server. So as we bring up new forms, stuff gets migrated to the new server. But they keep promising that they're almost done getting everything set up so where it's just one entry point. But I'm not going to hold my breath and promise any timelines for that kind of stuff.
All right, Ariel, I think we're good in chat right now. I hope that answers John's question.
Do pre-construction meetings fulfill education requirements for the developer engineer? Possibly. A pre-con meeting in and of itself won't fulfill that educational requirement. However, if the permittee is providing educational materials during these pre-con meetings, or documents that, and they document which materials are handed out, how many people they hand it out to, then that could be reported as education. So a pre-con meeting in and of itself, no. If you design your pre-con meetings to meet your educational requirements, then yes, and you maintain that documentation.
Okay, Ariel, I don't see anything. Oh, I got Jana Brown's asking for the number of comments received from the public on construction site projects and minimum control measure 2. Would this be only for sites 1 acre or larger, or part of a larger plan of common development?
So so you're asking, do you keep count of public comments for less than 1 acre or more than 1 acre separate? Am I hearing it right?
I'm not sure. Jana, are you able to come off mute and talk? John Clarson's asking, can those comments count toward public participation? So, of course, I don't know if we, Okay, Jana's asking for the field on the annual report. Do we report all or just over 1 acre? So I'll try to answer this question. If it's a site that's required, that the MS4 is required to ensure that the proper erosion prevention sediment control measures are in place, that's what you report. If it's less than 1 acre, not part of a common plan, then that really wouldn't apply. But if it's less than 1 acre and part of a common plan, it would apply. Typically, you all are providing grading permits, if that makes sense. So if the site's got a grading permit and it meets the requirements of y'all's MS4 permit of having the proper BMP EPSC measures in place, that would count towards that. I hope that makes sense. Ariel, do you have anything to add to that?
I'd probably say in most of these questions, my biggest recommendation is understand where your number comes from that you put in the annual report form. So that when we come and do our audit and we say, okay, in your annual report, you said X, show me your evidence to substantiate that. You understand where that number originated from, that you're not trying to make it up as you go.
All right. John Clarson's asking, I'm assuming related to Jana's question, for the number of comments received on a particular project. Can those comments count towards public participation? I believe that again, yes, because we're talking about minimum control measure 2. So that those comments and how many people asked during that public event, if you will, or hearing, then that would go towards participation. Do you have anything else to add to that, Ariel?
I think that covers it.
Okay. Sheila is indicating she has one more question about the self-audit report. Sheila?
Okay.
So it's kind of a two-piece question about the self-audit. So if we're looking at, say, the monitoring, basically nobody can be out of compliance with our monitoring until year 5, correct? And because if I submit, say, half of it this year, half of it, a quarter of it the following year, and a quarter of it the following year, as long as, like, I can't be out of compliance until year 5, correct?
Not necessarily. That you're supposed to monitor the streams once in a 5-year period. So it depends when you monitored the stream last. If it's set up where the monitoring deadline is within those reporting years, sure. But again, that particular part of the program, it just depends when you monitor that stream segment last.
Oh, okay. So some people's don't quite overlap with the 5 year, so they may be out of compliance.
Yes, ma'am. But
Okay.
but as we work through this and people get used to submitting through my TDEC and reporting, submitting the information in one location, it'll become more clear for everybody as we move forward.
Okay. And then I was looking at the education component. So it says that the education component, I think training for your employees has to be done in the 5-year period. It's no longer annual reporting. It's to be completed in the next cycle, which is our 5-year cycle. So if we didn't, even if we say we didn't train 250 people, we're still not out of compliance because we have the rest of our cycle to get that completed. Is that correct? Because I think a lot of people are thinking they're out of compliance, but we're really not.
Mhm.
You're not out of compliance if you didn't complete your education because you have 4 years left. You're not out of compliance on your monitoring if your monitoring aligns with the 5-year plan. You're not out of compliance with your post-construction because we have 2 years to get that in compliance. So
Correct.
I think a lot of people we're thinking we would be out of compliance in all these things on our self-audit. And I've struggled a lot with that and spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. What am I supposed to put on this? And I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm really not out of compliance on things that I thought I was. So I wanted to kind of point that out for people. And I've talked to other people and they're like, yeah, we're out of compliance. I'm like, no, you're not. So I wanted you guys to clarify and help people with that, to realize that maybe they actually aren't out of compliance. They're running a great, robust program, but they may not have gotten everything done this year, but it's okay. Some of the options we have the whole cycle to get done.
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was trying to touch on earlier. It's not, you're not evaluating compliance at the end of the 5-year term every annual report period. You need to look at, for this annual report period, what did the permit require, and am I in compliance with that? And just like you were explaining, in probably a lot more better detail and more succinct way, your example with the education component is spot on. If that requirement isn't required yet, that doesn't mean you're not in compliance. It's kind of like filing your taxes. If you get your forms from your employer at the end of January, that doesn't mean you're going to get in trouble with the IRS because you don't have your IRS tax form filled in before it's due. It's not due yet.
Yeah.
So you just got to look at what is required for that particular annual report and make that determination at that time.
Right. And if you didn't get your 3 events done this time, it's okay. Those requirements weren't due this period. That's
Because
next
this,
reporting, not this one. So I think I'm just wanting
Yeah.
most people to realize they're probably not going to be out of compliance on their education component. They're not going to be out of compliance on their monitoring component, and they're not going to be out of compliance on their post-construction. So just look at it really closely before you submit that to your mayor, and your mayor come back and say, well, why are we out of compliance on everything? And you're like, well, I'm doing my best, you know, and they may not think that's good enough. I just don't want the MS4s to
shoot themselves in the foot.
yeah, absolutely. There's no reason for that. Just check that out before you submit it, that you are.
Yeah.
You're probably okay.
Yeah. And remember, this reporting period is covering the tail end of the last permit.
Right.
So even if on, let's say, July 30th, you held an education event, go ahead and put that on there. Don't exclude it. Anything from July 1st to June 30th. And I'll tell everybody right now that the things that we're looking at is, one, making sure that it's signed properly. Remember, if you haven't started your annual report yet, you may have to have that delegation of authority submitted in order to even open up and start the report.
Right. And Era, that's great that you mentioned that, because someone's asking, where is that form? Or example, allow a delegation for allowing someone who is not the final signer to enter the data and annual report.
I can put an example that we have from the wastewater side. It can be an email from your city administrator, your mayor. If it comes from their account, I can accept that as well. I think we can add that up to the chat and let people have a copy of that. I'll pull that up. Basically, we just need something that says this person or this position. So if you know you're getting ready to retire, you may want to have this letter set up for the MS4 program manager. And then that way, when you retire and the new program manager takes over, they don't have to submit a new letter. If you've got 3 or 4 people that are going to fill out different components of the report, go ahead and add them to this same letter as well. Another thing that's come up a couple times is, if you've got multiple people working on a report, one person will need to start it and share it with the others. You can't merge. You can't each individual start their own report and merge them later.
Right. Tom, that question was from Tom Lawrence. Tom, I hope that helped answer your question. And after this call today, if you still have questions about delegation of authority, Tom gave a thumb up, authority. Don't hesitate to reach out to Robbie Brown, myself, or Ariel. John Carson's asking a question about monitoring. So you can't change the timeline on your monitoring plan from previous cycles. No, because the monitoring for option 1 has been on a 5-year cycle. If you remember during our listening sessions and so forth, talking with folks, if we expressed that there would not be significant changes to this section of the permit and to go ahead and prepare for their next monitoring. And if they were going to choose option 2 to start drafting their option 2 plan, again, the monitoring on the every 5 years is specific to option 1, which is it is a set plan. And the wording from the permit reads, for the most part, for each type of monitoring, analytical and non-analytical, at least 1 sample per segment must be collected with all segments with the MS4 jurisdiction sampled in a 5-year period. No more than 5 years between samples in a segment. So I hope that answers your question, John. All right, Ariel.
All right. I think we're done with the question list. If the chat's quiet.
Hey, Ariel, if anyone can't get into their portal yet and would like to see like my print PDF, I'm happy to email that to them just so they can figure out what to do to get started. I've heard some of our people still can't get in. Hopefully they've got it worked out by now, but if not, I'm happy to just shoot them over my PDF if they just want something to look at.
And thank you for that, Sheila. And remind folks that the training sessions, the 5 training sessions that we hosted, Robbie Brown and Ariel hosted, were recorded, and the videos are on our website with a copy of the presentation as a PDF. So that would help folks also.
Yeah. And in those presentations, we did screenshots of each of the questions or sections of questions. So we'll be able to see some of it through there as well. I don't know, Anne might get mad at me, but I'll go ahead and tell everybody. Okay, so the rulemaking hearing for the changes to the rules regarding that uncontaminated roof runoff. I sent that public notice out to everybody that I had as listed as an MS4 program manager back in July. So that rulemaker hearing is on September 9th at 11 a.m. There is a Teams option to join, as well as in person downtown in the Tennessee Tower. The Chapter 5 and Chapter 10, which apply to the MS4 program, starts at 11. There is a public hearing at 10 o'clock that day for Chapter 2, which is in regards to prohibition on small wastewater plants under 30,000 gallons a day for using activated sludge. So those 2 run simultaneously. Or sorry, not simultaneously, consecutively.
Ariel,
So we've got 2 public hearings that day.
Okay, I'm sorry. I may be mistaken, but I believe the public hearing is on, I believe you said September the 9th. I believe it's September the 6th.
Yes, September the 6th.
Okay.
Sorry if I said the wrong date.
Yeah. Ariel, we've got a question in the chat from John Clarkson. Are we opening the meeting to questions from the floor?
Sure.
Yeah, right. And Karina, are you still on the line?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Could you help? Is Ariel correct? And I'm assuming so. Are we going to open the meetings for questions from the floor during that rulemaking hearing?
Oh, the rulemaking hearing? I thought you were talking about now. Okay.
Oh,
Okay, so a public hearing.
well, I'm not
Um,
sure. This is John's question. So John, is that, I was. So you were asking for whether the department was gonna open the meeting to questions from the floor?
Talking a number?
Huh? This meeting. Okay. All right. This meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so are we gonna open this meeting for questions? We've got 8 minutes, Ariel. I have to jump off right at 10, but I'm available if
Yeah.
you, okay.
We got 8 minutes. We can ask away.
It might be easier to come off mute and ask the question.
No questions? All right. Going once, going twice. Think we're all good.
Excellent. All right. Remember